Hi, and thank you so much for joining us today. I want to welcome everyone to Epsagon's product launch announcement, introducing applied observability support for Kubernetes and Azure. Your presenter for this webinar is Ron Ribbenzoff, the CTO and co-founder of Epsagon. Our Twitter handles are here for a reason. You can reach out to us at absolutely any time. Search for @RonRib or @Epsagon. Say hi, leave some feedback, and follow us to stay updated with Epsagon. Before we welcome Ron, let's go over what you'll be seeing today. We'll start with the reveal of our Microsoft Azure Cloud partnership and Epsagon's Azure Kubernetes service support. Then we'll showcase our enhanced automation and correlation capabilities and demonstrate the advanced deep containers and Kubernetes features we've been working on. Before we begin, some housekeeping items. The webinar is recorded and will be shared with you within the next week via email, but feel free to take screenshots. We encourage you to ask any question you might have. The Epsagon team is moderating the chat, and Ron will answer your questions toward the end of the session. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ron Ribbenzoff, Epsagon's CTO and co-founder.
Thank you very much, Karen, and again, thank you very much everyone for joining. In this part, I'm going to demonstrate all of the new features and we'll give some overview about observability. So let's start first with what's our agenda when we're speaking about observability. In this case, when we're thinking about what is observability for microservices, we have three pillars in mind: metrics, logging, and tracing. Only when combining them together, we can really leverage a powerful tool that will assist us both in monitoring and in troubleshooting. As you know, metrics tells us what happened, for example, a spike in the CPU, or a traffic spike, or lower latency, and so on. Then the logs will tell us why something bad happened, for example, because we got too many requests, or an exception happened. And ultimately, traces will tell us where the problem happened. Among all of the traces or all of the requests that are coming in, we'll be able to visualize it over multiple services, over multiple resources. So the only way to actually do observability is to combine all of them together under the same platform, which that's exactly what Epsagon brings. Epsagon also helps teams to solve faster issues. Any kind of troubleshooting problem that takes a very long time today to understand what user experienced it or which service especially impacted through that scenario. Epsagon really helps leverage tracing, metrics, and logging and the all observability aspects to fix faster and increase the velocity. Also, Epsagon helps to observe complex applications. As we know, applications are getting more and more complex and more distributed. And Epsagon is the tool that will be able to give you in a bird's eye what's going on, which services are talking to one another, and in general, bring some order to the chaos. Ultimately, Epsagon also helps you to optimize applications, detect bottlenecks, or even provide a better customer experience to your own customers. That's something that's already included in Epsagon, and it's a super challenge today across engineering and DevOps teams. So let's jump now into the demos. I'll start first with our newest Kubernetes integration that supports AKS, EKS, or any flavor of Kubernetes out there. The integration itself is super simple. All you have to do is just to run the command with your own token, and Epsagon automatically takes care to integrate your cluster. It takes care to do that with setting up a dedicated Prometheus to you that will generate all the metrics and the information across your cluster and across your account. So once that's done, you can easily see all of your integrated clusters. For example, in this case, our AKS cluster that's run on Azure, and we also have some examples running with our own Kubernetes. Once integrated, we'll be able to see clusters, nodes, pods, containers, and deployments. Everything comes out of the box, so you don't need to manually build a dashboard or configure anything. And you'll start to see metrics for each and every one of them. For example, the following cluster to see is resource usage or memory usage. And if we're interested in looking, for example, at the specific containers and see their performance or just in general their logs, we can easily do that. Epsagon correlates, as we mentioned, metrics, traces, and logs all under the same dashboard. So here we can see the logs of a specific container. And then even go, for example, to pods to see the status of a specific pod that is running inside our cluster. With that saying, we're still looking for another pillar of observability, which is the traces. So let's look for a specific pod that I'm interested to explore, which is a Python one named Hello Python. It's a part of the Hello Python deployment that I can have a look. But here I'm interested in correlating my environment issues to the traces, to the actual requests that are running inside of it. And in this example, we'll be able to click on it. It will take us to the trace search screen, which allows us to search across any trace, any payload, any request in our system. In this example, we can see that we're already filtering for a specific pod name, as we saw before. We can see some more statistics like trace status and errors, average duration. Everything is customizable for every time period that we're interested in looking. And then comes all of the events that related to this criteria. Unlike logs over here that you need to manually understand or correlate where everything goes and what's correlated to each and every event, once you're clicking on the desired event, it will reveal a trace for you. This trace includes every call or every event that happened in the system, including, for example, the Flask application name, endpoint, payloads, environment that it's running on, anything that comes in from the incoming GET request and how long it takes. So all of the information and all of the payload is already visible for you to explore it. Now, we already saw metrics, we already saw some logs, and we're seeing traces. What about doing the opposite direction? For example, if I already got to this trace where I'm seeing the Flask call over my Python application, let's maybe see the container that it was running on top of as part of the Kubernetes cluster. Or even let's see the logs, the actual logs that were printed out throughout that specific request that a specific user experienced. So here is the exact logs with all of the metadata enriched. And again, everything comes out of the box using Epsagon. You don't need to manually customize logs, shippings, configurations, or any dashboards. Everything is already built in with Epsagon. Another thing that we released with the following Kubernetes announcement is to be able to generate alerts based on Kubernetes environments. For example, if a cluster reaches a certain CPU limit, or if a specific pod is misbehaving, or memory for a specific container crossing some thresholds, we can define any kind of alerts, as you can see in the following examples, and we can ship them to any kind of the following integrations that you're seeing over here, including Slack, PagerDuty, VictorOps, ServiceNow, and more. Another thing that we recently released is support for Azure Services and support for Azure tracing. Running on Kubernetes or containers or any other environment over Azure, you'll start to be able to see any call that you're making. We've already made an Express application for this example, so we got this Express app over here, and I'm interested to know exactly what happened in this specific request. So I'll be able to click on the event, and it will show me the story of the request that led us to this event. Now let's start with the beginning. I can see that we got a GET request that took almost 700 milliseconds. I can see exactly what was the endpoint and the status code and what was in the HTTP params or request headers or request body. I can see any kind of payload that is listed in here, so I know exactly what happened. I can drill down to the Express application to see more details about what happened inside. And I can also see any call that is being made using the Azure SDK to services like Cosmos DB, Blob Storage, or any other service out there. For example, we did on Cosmos DB create, and we can see exactly all the details of the item that we created on Cosmos DB and how long it took. We can also see the same for the Blob Storage to see that we uploaded the file and downloaded the file and how long it took and what exactly happened. We can see it also in the timeline view, which shows us exactly how long each operation takes in the overall duration, which is great for performance measurements. Another thing that Epsagon recently released is a better integration for ECS services. ECS or Fargate that are running on AWS now have the same as we saw with Kubernetes, but for clusters, services, instances, and tasks. You can see for each and every service exactly what's running and how it's running. You can see for every instance exactly what's the performance of it, the configurations. You can see the logs for the tasks. For example, let's take a real example where I'm interested in a specific task logs. So I can see the running task and it's running on EC2. Luckily, if something bad happens there, I don't need to manually look for the logs. I can just click within Epsagon on show the logs, and I'll get all the logs directly to me. So it makes it much more easier to troubleshoot and understand problems with the environment. Now, if I'm interested in a specific traces on the services that I'm running, that's also doable, and that's very easy. All I need to click is to show traces on the specific service that I'm interested in, and it will reveal me with all of the events and the metrics that we already saw before, and I'll be able to click on any one of them to actually visualize the full event from end to end. In this example, by the way, we're having an issue with a DynamoDB. As you can see on the right-hand side, conditional check failed exception, and we can see all of the details that relate to this problem. One thing that I would love to finish with is the custom tags, another great feature that's released by Epsagon. When you're looking for something in your data, it might be hard to locate it or find it in the logs, but using Epsagon, you can index any kind of data that you're interested in. So let's see over here, let's start with filtering, for example, any resource type that is specifically SNS. I'm looking for something that I want to troubleshoot over SNS payloads. So let's click apply and let's see exactly what we get. We can see all calls for SNS. Let's get into one of them to see what actually happened. So we're seeing we got trigger from SNS from one Lambda service to another, and we can see, as we know, the payloads that are inside of it. So the SNS message included that specific payload. Now I can see the title, and it's interesting for me to look for all of the messages that included something in the title. Unfortunately, it might be hard to do so with logs because I need to manually go through each and every line of log and try to understand what's going on in there and index it and do many things. But all I want to do is just show me all titles where the Netflix word appear. So all I need to do is just to let Epsagon that I'm interested in that specific tag. So clicking on index tag and then selecting the aws.sns.message.title, and then I'll be able to filter that using the trace search. I already filtered it before, indexed it before, so I can click on that specific filter and then look for everything that is relevant. In my case, I'm looking for everything that contains the word Netflix. So let's do it over here again. And I'm interested in everything that includes the word Netflix, and I'll be able to apply this search and see every event that relates to this specific filter. I can already see on the snippet before I'm getting into the event what's the actual title. So that's a really helpful tool when we're troubleshooting something or we need to have a drill down into customer IDs or any ID that we can tag using Epsagon and then filter it down in an easier way. Thank you very much for joining. I would love to stay here now if you have any questions or anything that I would love to answer, feedback or issues.
Hey everyone, and thank you again for listening. So the first question that I got is around what are the alternatives to Epsagon and what else can you do to monitor Kubernetes out of the box? So as we already saw, Epsagon brings this kind of dashboard, but if you're interested, the first things that come in mind are the Kubernetes dashboard that comes with the master container itself, that you can visualize all nodes, pods, and containers. You can't define any alerts or do anything meaningful on it, but it's just more of a resource management that you're having. On top of that, the most popular solution today to get metrics and define alerts is Prometheus. Prometheus, if you're unfamiliar, is part of the CNCF Cloud Native Foundation tool, already graduated, a super great tool. We use it behind the scenes to set up the monitoring for you. If you're setting it up, you need to make sure that you know how to connect it to multiple clusters if needed, and how to have a persistent data store that is stored across days, weeks, or whatever you want to store your information for, and how to define alerts and integrate it to different kind of services, for example, to get the alerts like PagerDuty, VictorOps. So this would be the most popular one to choose. There are obviously lots and lots of other alternatives out there. But as we mentioned, with the approach of Epsagon is just plug it and start using the built-in dashboards, built-in alerts, built-in integrations. Don't think about spending time on building observability tool. I'm going to move now to the second question is from Gabriel. What do you need to do in order to get started with monitoring microservices on Azure Container Services, and if there is any support for our sockets? So super simple, and yes, for some of the libraries. What you need to do in order to get started, and you can see that on the documentation website of Epsagon, docs.epsagon.com. I can share the links right afterwards. You'll be able to see how you get started with monitoring your environment. So for example, let's say your environment composed with Java or Java Spring or Python or anything else. You just put Epsagon to work, and it automatically starts to understand what services you're having, including RSockets calls or gRPC or message queuing or any other service. So for you, it's almost a plug and play solution that you're getting everything out of the box. We would love to help you and support you, on the onboarding itself. Let's move to another question from Adam. Thank you very much for the feedback. Yes, so if there is a way to set thresholds and conditions based on regex that matches the logs, so there is. We just don't use the logs as you're used to use them. We're using kind of a different technique that's called traces. Traces, in other words, equals structured log. You can see in this example, let's have this example. So this trace tells me that I've had a produce message to Kafka, which took 5 milliseconds. And within the Kafka payload, I had this item ID and this username. So I don't really need logs when I'm having all of this information. I can just let Epsagon alert me when, for example, a username exists or the quantity reaches a certain threshold. The way to do that is using our trace search mechanism. It's built behind the scenes on Grafana, Elastic, Prometheus, and other services to make your life easier, so you wouldn't need to know all of the query languages or index your own tags or handle scale. And you can do that for any field that you're interested. Anything in here or any index that you want to add for yourself. In this example, let's say I'm interested to follow what's the quantity over time. So I can easily index this tag under index tag and select the Kafka.value.quantity. And then I'll be able to generate alerts, get information about it when it happens, set alert when it crosses any threshold, or just look for it just as we saw before. For example, if I'm interested in anything in the payload, for example, when I'm sending a message to a specific host. So let's see what host do we got here. So we'll be able to see any call that we're making. In this example, I'm interested, let's say, in calls to Stripe, because I'm interested in something that doesn't work very properly and understand, what's kind of the status code that I'm getting. So I'll be able to see that listed in here and find it and alert based on anything that you're seeing on the dashboard. Another question that we got from Prashant, what are your AIOps features roadmap behind monitoring? So that's a great question. Two things that we have, one that is already in place and one that is upcoming on the near future. So the first one is detecting trends that are, kind of bad for your application. Some things that are unique to serverless, containers, applications in general. If we're detecting like a spike in your traffic, or we're detecting a trend that something is getting slower, or even specific things for serverless like Lambda functions, we automatically alert you. Things that we plan to do, moving forward is to give you some more insightful information based on the calls that you're actually making on the code. For example, ways to optimize and improve your application based on what we know from existing applications, way to improve queries or batching or caching to some of the services, things that Epsagon can do and will do with that information to allow you to optimize your software and ship better kind of software out there. Are there any questions from anyone else? I would love to address them. Awesome. So another tip, just if we're going off soon. So another tip, observability contains a lot of things, as you saw. It's still something that, being built as we speak, the whole observability ecosystem and what are the needed features. I think that that's a great tip for all of you out there. Try to understand what's your strategy within the company. Try to understand what's your what's the needed things that are missing for you today? Is it troubleshooting that becomes very slow? Is it a way to understand the application or just be able to optimize it? Once you know that, it's really, it's really easy to say, let's implement something ourselves. But as you drill down, you understand better and better that things are not that easy, and it takes long, and it takes time to integrate it and do many things. So I think as a quick tip, try to understand what's your strategy and try to compare it to tools out there. Instead of implementing on your own, try to compare it and understand what existing tools can bring you out of the box without you needing to work for observability, but instead of it just getting it out of the box and work on what you're doing best. Perfect. So I'll stay here for a few more minutes if you'll have any questions. But again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining.